I'm on. You on?
Yes.
Yes.
No. Am I on?
Yeah.
Okay.
You're on.
Okay.
Take it
Ooh,
away.
yeah. Okay. Uh, we're glad that you're here this nice morning, and tell you a couple of little stories at first. Stan, in his last email to me, said, "Wear green."
Or get pinched.
Or what?
Or get pinched.
Okay. So, Juanita set out a green shirt for me. We did have a green shirt, and I tried to get it on this morning, and the collar was just so tight. She said, "Well, I can get it tight." I said, "Honey, Stan doesn't want me up or can't talk."
No.
So anyway, we decided to forego that. But
You
my
got,
name
You got
used
green in your tie. You're fine.
my name used to be our name used to be McLeod. Believe it or not, like McConnell. Joe and I were talking this morning about that's actually it's Irish Scottish prefix on there, and then gradually the Cloud Association, when they send you letters trying to get you to join, they got a lot of McLeods in the list there. So I thought maybe we could make yours McWilson just for today, so that you'd feel more comfortable with that.
All right.
And Juanita came in, and we were talking about the lesson, and she reminded me of something I had totally forgotten about. I was 34. We were living in Florence, Kentucky, across from Cincinnati, and we had an assignment the next day on the Joseph story. We had to read it in Hebrew for my Hebrew class that I was taking with Dr. Blank. And it was about 1:30 in the morning, and I was just finishing up, and I started reading the story about Joseph. We'd been through the story in Hebrew, several chapters, as you know. And I was at the point where Joseph was telling him, "I'm Joseph," and tears are, they're crying. And I just didn't realize, it was just such an emotional thing. Tears were rolling down my cheek, and I didn't realize it. And she walks in and she said, "What is going on?" And I said, "This story has just touched me so much." So I've never told you that story, have I?
You have not. I did think of you this morning, though, when John did the first 4 verses, and there was toledot in verse 2, which is the reason we have the translated statement that says this is the account of whoever. And that's a repetitive pattern in the Old Testament that you learn in Hebrew. And it just jumped right off the page to me this morning. So,
well, this is, we did the Joseph, those did the classes back several months ago. We were doing characters. We did 1 or 2 lessons on Joseph. But we're taking a little bit different route today and to talk about Joseph's family quite a bit. So,
yeah.
So
here we go. Joseph's journey through challenges. Genesis 37. We skipped 38. 38 is important as far as the chronology, because that lets you know how Joseph gets to be the age that he is by the time you rejoin the Joseph story in 39. But we're looking at just Joseph, so 37, 39 through 50. And I think I'll ask you this. This was bouncing around in my head this morning. I think it's fine to take biblical stories and make some assumptions that because of how we feel about certain things, that's how the biblical characters might feel about things. I don't think it's good to make presuppositions that they have to think that way, right? So when we look at something like this, the first son of Rachel, so I thought about just that statement. Joseph is the firstborn of Jacob's favorite wife. And I think we have to keep that in mind. And then we also have to keep in mind when we get, which we'll talk about, and I won't steal your thunder, that he also had a younger brother named Benjamin, who was also from Rachel. And so it does tell us that he's set apart among the sons of Jacob, and he's favored by Jacob, and his older brothers despise him, especially Leah's children, which I think is something we have to pause and say, okay, there's multiple moms here, and there's children from those individual ladies, and then those children who are brothers and sisters are wrestling for their dad's favor because their dad is tied to the favor of Rachel being his favorite wife. And we keep that in mind. Then we also keep in mind just how kids grow up. So take us on some ideas of bad dads and what they teach us.
Okay, we decided to talk about what's going on in families and how the choices your parents make. We've talked a lot about children and their choices. Last June, when I preached that sermon on influencing people, we spent a lot of time on influencing young people and how the youth group influenced me, etc. But anyway, if you'll flip the slide.
I will do so.
Okay. We had a lot more in here. We actually had enough for a whole lesson. We decided, well, we don't want to do that much, but we do want to talk about, and I found it very, very difficult in looking through the Bible, looking through the internet and everything, where it talked about, well, the first thing that we weren't even going to mention today, I think he and I did mention it, but those families, if you'll look in the Bible and notice those families with more than one wife, it's conflict. In Samuel's story, you've got Hannah, the favorite wife of Elkanah, and then you've got Peninnah, who has all the babies, and they have just a constant battle between each other, and Peninnah makes Hannah cry a lot.
Which is echoed here, because Leah starts having children right away for Jacob, and Rebekah doesn't.
Right. And again, I was glad John and Micah mentioned about, for example, Isaac and Rebekah. Here's two parents. One of them favors one child and does everything to make that child successful. The other favors the other child, does everything to make that child successful. And they ended up, just children hating each other because of that situation. So we come to Jacob, and you don't usually think about that, but here you've got four women producing children. You got two main wives, so those children are going to be the most influential children, the strongest children, and inheritance, et cetera, et cetera. The concubines' children are played down. I'm going to give you a little different interpretation. I'm glad John Micah mentioned the Na'ar, but we'll come back to that later on. But anyway, so in Jacob's partiality to Joseph made a difference. We'll talk about that. Eli, we could have talked a lot about him, and mentions many times there in Shiloh when Samuel's a young man growing up. It mentions many times about how undisciplined that Eli's sons were, how bad they were, and the bad things they did, and how they had sexual relations with the young maids there at the shrine. They cheated on the sacrifices. I mean, they were horrible. And even though Eli chastised them for it, he never stopped them. He let them get away with it. And so we have this verse here in 229 that God says, "You honored your sons above me." Woo! You honored your sons above me.
So that's bad dad number two.
Bad, yeah. And then David, his first 6 sons were born to 6 different women. And all the women would like to see their sons as the next king. They would like to be the queen mother. So you have this bickering going on. I'll come back to David in just a second. Threw one out we decided not to do, and that's Herod the Great. All his wives and his wicked sons that came out of that, just one after the other, and bickering going on, and fights behind the scenes. And even his favorite wife, he had to execute because she was accused of something she didn't even do wrong. And Herod himself executed 3 of his own sons. 3 of his own sons.
And though, what's interesting, we mentioned this, I think, when we did the David lessons back for the heroes of the Bible, or heroes of faith. But God told him, the sword will not depart your house.
Right.
Because of what initially happened with Bathsheba and Uriah. And so he kind of had a predicted future of a bunch of mess because of what he did.
He couldn't discipline his own sons because they would just say, Oh, Dad, I see. Like if when Amnon raped Tamar, his half sister, he said that David was angry about it, but he said nothing at all to Amnon because Amnon would just said, "Oh, you mean like you and Bathsheba and your murder of Uriah and et cetera, et cetera." It's kind of hard to discipline somebody when you've set a bad example.
Yeah.
So go back to that one
Oh,
just
sorry.
a second.
I thought you were
Sorry.
finished.
So what happens here is you've got son number one is going to be taken out after he rapes the full sister of Absalom. Absalom's going to take out his vengeance on him, and so he assassinates him. And then later on, son number four, Absalom, son number three, we don't know what happened to son number two. He may have died young, or he may not have been involved in all these politics and whatever. But Adonijah declares himself king after David has already told Bathsheba Solomon's going to be the next king. And so just chaos, and even his influence on Solomon, who came later. It looked like in the early years, great influence on Solomon, but in the later years, Solomon, goes astray.
So we bring in the other half. We now go to bad parents instead of just bad dads. And so we come here and you see the name there, Jezebel on the screen with Ahab. And I think that just brings it up to parenting in general that sets bad examples for then the descendants that come along later and act like dad or mom.
Yeah, you marry a bad man or a bad woman, and you've just done such a disfavor to the children that are going to come along. And so this is a little bit of maybe a confusing story because you've got an Azaniah in the north, son of Ahab and Jezebel, and Azaniah in the south. We'll come back later. You've got a Jeroboam in the north, son of Ahab and Jezebel, and a Jeroboam in the south, all at the same time. And so when they're switching back and forth, so we'll try to straighten that out for you. So what happened is, first of all, as we noted, Ahab married this wicked woman, and this first child born is Ahaziah. We don't know a lot about him because he only ruled a couple of years, but we do know when he got sick, instead of going to God and one of God's prophets, he goes to Baal. He goes to Beelzebub down in one of the Philistine cities, and then he ends up dying, and his brother takes over, Jehoram, and Jehoram ends up being a wicked king in the north. Then they have a sister named Athaliah, who is really a sweet lady. She's made just about as bad as Jezebel. She marries the king down south, who's named Jehoram. She marries that king, corrupts him to some degree. They have a child named Ahaziah, and she had bad influence on him. Then when those children when the two children left, the Jeroboam in the north and Ahaziah in the south, God sends a prophet to tell Jehu to go wipe them out. So he wipes them out. Athaliah is still down in Judah. They've had these child Ahaziah, and Ahaziah has several children. She executes, when she finds out her son has been killed in battle, she executes all of her grandchildren but one. She can't find him. He's hidden in the temple. What a sweet lady that was. Executed her grandchildren so she could become the queen.
These events take place between 1 Kings 16:28 through 2 Kings 11:16, and there's more than 17 chapters out of 47 in the two books of Kings about these bad families, bad parents.
Ahab family.
Yeah.
It takes up that many chapters in the last half of 1 Kings and the first part of 2 Kings. God says, you've got to know these stories. And that's why these stories are all there, so us to know them and learn by them.
And so we're going to bring this back around. Don't worry. We'll get back to Jacob and Joseph here in a second. So now we go to the other side, good fathers, right? And I hope you're sitting there or out there wherever you are online thinking, well, which is Jacob? Is he really bad? Because he's sure not as bad as the ones we just went through, or is he possibly good? Keep thinking that way because I think you'll see that he's not as bad as maybe we think, but he did make some poor decisions. But with good fathers, well, you take this. This is your Amplified Bible from
That's
Proverbs.
all right. You take it.
Dr. Cloud put this in from Proverbs 20, verse 7, from the Amplified translation. The righteous man who walks in integrity and lives life in accord with his godly beliefs, how blessed, happy, and spiritually secure are his children after him, who have his example to follow. And then on the right, you have a different translation over there that just basically says the righteous man walks in his integrity. His children are blessed after him. But what Dr. Cloud did here was kind of exegete some of that into that extra bracketed word so that we could see that. But that's how it happens, is you have a good example. You may not always make great decisions. You make mistakes because you're human. But if you're following God, if you're following Yahweh, and you're modeling that to your children, then your children will follow Yahweh as well. And what we just saw from those bad fathers and bad mothers is that's not what they did. As a matter of fact, they went to Baal, which we know from the New Testament, that Baal was a synonym for the devil in the Old Testament. So literally worshiping evil rather than good.
Yeah.
And then we looked at this in Joshua as well from the New Living Translation. But if you refuse to serve the Lord, this is Joshua basically giving the people an ultimatum. If you refuse to serve Yahweh, then choose today whom you will serve. Would you prefer the gods your ancestors served beyond the Euphrates, or will it be the gods of the Amorites in those lands that you now live? But as for me and my family, we will serve the Lord. So Joshua basically saying the same thing. Are you going to go to the other deities that we know are not Yahweh, not the creator of the universe, or are you going to serve who you've been taught to actually believe in, put your faith in, and know is the creator of all? And for Joshua and his family, he's saying that's what he'll do, and that's what he models out the rest of his biblical information.
So what Scripture is talking about, Scripture points out good fathers, bad fathers, good mothers, bad mothers, good children, bad children. It actually points those things out and shows you how important this is. And people really don't think so. A lot of times when I used to do it a lot, used to counsel people about, they'd come to me, want me to perform the wedding. And so I would sit down, I said, I don't do that unless I can counsel you. That is, I want 2 or 3 sessions where you talk about some very, very serious things. Well, I had one guy one time came, and this young lady had called me up, and we had worked at that church for a few years, and she said, I just met the most wonderful guy, and I want you to marry us. And I asked a few questions, like, how long have you known him? 2 weeks. 2 weeks. And so I said, well, we have to have a little meeting. So we met. She was about 23. She was an old maid because all of her younger sisters had gotten married. And she was upset that she was the last one, the oldest one, and she was a whopping, 23. Her husband-to-be was 19. So we chatted a while, and he said, I don't really want to meet with this one time. He said, I'll just tell you about my situation. My first marriage, now he's 19, my first marriage, I married this woman, just a terrible woman, divorced her. The second woman I divorced, now this is a 19-year-old. So I said, could you step out just a few minutes? I wanted to talk to whatever her name was. And he said, she's got this big smile on her face. And I said, well, I said, I would marry him if he was the last guy on this face of the earth. I said, I hate to say things like that, but I couldn't possibly marry you to this guy. And at least spend some weeks and months together. She didn't. She married him, and 6 months later, Juanita ran into her at a bowling alley, I believe. And she had a big black eye.
Oh.
and she had divorce papers were already being processed. So see, she changed her whole life because she had to, whomever else she dated, there she had to tell them about that story, and she had to be a little afraid. So it's really important, and I just tell people, I just can't perform the wedding unless you do this, this, and this. Anyway, I did.
Well, we put some proverbs up here that you've probably already looked at on the screen, where it's kind of confirming what we're saying, is that if you follow the directions of good, faithful fathers and mothers, even though they will make mistakes, then children will stay, connected to the faith. And you can see that there in both of those. You see your father and do not forsake your father and the law of your mother. And then down in 6:20 rather, my son, keep your father's command and don't reject your mother's teaching. So there is redeeming facts here. Is what we're coming to. Like it's not that anybody who makes mistakes or falls away from faith and then comes back, you can't always blame your parents. There's accountability in the children as well. But what we're trying to get at is that the family of Joseph is very complicated. And Dr. Cloud alluded to this when we first began this morning. But you see there under Jacob, you see the ladies' names in red. Those are the four mothers. Those are the two wives and concubines is probably the proper way to say it. You've got Leah is the older sister that Laban tricked Jacob with and worked the 7 years and then had to work another 7 years in order to have Rachel. So he ends up with two wives. I don't think that was his intention. I think he wanted to marry Rachel. He ended up marrying Leah. Then the concubines, Zilpah and Bilhah, I don't really remember off the top of my head why they enter the picture, like why they're needed. But in any case, and I'm not trying to cut you off, the numbers of the children underneath are how you end up with the 12 tribes and where the siblings come from.
Yeah, what was happening was Rachel not being successful.
Childbearing.
Yeah. It was kind of like when Sarah wanted to have a baby, and so said to Abraham, well, here's Hagar, and you have a child, and supposedly the real wife got credit for the child. It didn't work out a lot that way.
Right.
But and this chart that I found, they misspelled Bilhah, but
we fix it on the next one. We got a different chart here with some colors for you, where you can see the colors of the children underneath the robe color of their mom, so that you can understand who is from who.
So the concubine or the servant of the main wife or one wife. What happened there was you threw your why. You really need Leah really needed to throw it by the end because she already had 4 children, but she did. But Rachel had wanted her maidservant to be pitch hit for her, baseball terminology, and had a couple of children. But so when 10 children are born, Rachel still doesn't have a child.
Right. What I was meaning was I don't know after the 6 that Leah had why there was the desire to not just wait on Rachel. That was the only part I don't know that I've really understood that.
Yeah,
but that's
Rachel
okay.
probably caused that by pushing the issue.
Yeah.
And being upset because she just didn't think she's going to have a child.
So then we get to Joseph's age range, best we can discuss it. So, this morning we looked at the first couple of verses. We saw that he's 17, and today's an overview. We're going to have a break for Easter in 2 weeks, but we're going to be in Joseph for 5 more lessons after today. So this is just an overview of how his life kind of unfolded from 17. So he receives the coat, and he has the strange dreams, which we're going to talk about today. And that's at 17. Then he's sold into slavery. He's imprisoned at some age after that. He interprets the royal dreams while he's in prison at about age 28. Then at age 30, he interprets the dreams of Pharaoh, and that gives him his liberation from prison. And then from 30 to 37, he has his own children. From 37 to 44, his brothers come down to Egypt because of the famine, which we'll go through all this in detail over the coming weeks. Then somewhere between 54 and 61, of Joseph's age, his father Jacob passes away, and then we know that Joseph dies at 110 in Egypt, and then is asked to be carried out and not remain there.
Yeah, we're given more ages of Joseph than just about anybody
Yeah,
in Scripture, and we left that other chart out, didn't we?
we did.
Yeah,
Yeah.
that's fine. We had a couple of charts, and I told Stan, I said, look, as you go through this, count the things and delete what we've duplicated.
But what we want to get back to is that, okay, was Jacob really that bad of a dad, or did he just not make some good decisions with Joseph? And I'll just go ahead, since we've got roughly 20 minutes left, and we've got some slides that will take us through this, but just an overview. Here's the not our statement that John mentioned in the sermon and that you're an expert on. We know that Joseph was 17, and he's put in charge over his older brothers.
Yeah, the English translations don't make that clear. It could actually be translated, said that he was and notice that John Micah did correct the boy translation.
Mm-hmm.
He's not a boy. He's a young man, probably just a little younger than David when he fought Goliath. And the Hebrew could be translated, said he was a shepherd with his brothers. And notice what brothers are these. These are the 4 concubine sons, the lesser, the bottom of the barrel as far as status is concerned, because they're concubine sons. They're not main wives' sons. And so it can be translated that just as well as he was a shepherd with those, could be translated he was shepherding those. There are 2 Jewish scholars in their commentaries who translated that he, and what it looks like to me was he put, and to Stan, it looks like he decided he was going to make Joseph the crown sheik. And he ends up starting out by putting him over the 4 concubine sons and not messing with Leah's sons, because they're going to have a fit. Now, you have to also keep in mind that this is a filthy, wealthy family. Abraham's wealth mostly passed on to Isaac. Then it passed on to Jacob, and then on top of that, Jacob went up to Mesopotamia and brought back another chunk of wealth. So he had 2 fortunes.
Mm-hmm.
What he gave Esau when he met him coming back would have made anybody rich. So this is a really rich family. And I remember seeing a documentary one time where it showed Jacob in the tents there. It was like maybe 10 or 11 tents and maybe a couple hundred sheep. It's ridiculous. The text tells you over and over again that Abraham was extremely rich. And then Isaac got most of that fortune. Jacob got most of that fortune. And he picked up a second fortune. This is partly over money and the jealousy of all of that.
But I think, yes, and I think what we're trying to emphasize is that where did this jealousy from the brothers really originate from? And it originated from a younger sibling being put in command over older siblings who were also the firstborn of other women. So they would think, wait a minute, just because you're the firstborn of Rachel doesn't mean that we're not the firstborn of, from our mothers. And then he brings back to Jacob a bad report about them, which was his job to do.
Yeah, since if he were the crown sheik, that was
Yeah.
his job.
Right.
And it sounded like, in a sense it may have been tattletelling, but that was probably his job. He put him over these 4 boys to see how well he would do with them, and waiting later to put him over the other boys.
And so then when he puts them over all of them, he gets this tunic. And you see here on the screen, this is an idea. You see the long sleeves at the top. It's in Hebrew, it's a tunic of long sleeves. May have colors. Actually, there's a Hebrew word there that is transliterated, I think, on this screen or on one. No, right there. The Passim, pasim. We don't really know exactly what pasim means. It has been translated as multiple colors, but what we do know from the description of the tunic is that it was long-sleeved and came probably to the ankles, to the palms, and to the soles of the feet is actually what is probably the description. And if you're thinking, well, who cares? Well, if you're in an agricultural business, you don't want sleeves and things in your way if you're the one bundling the sheaves, if you're the one handling the sheep, if you're the one doing the work, right? Because it's gonna get, and nowadays it would get caught in the machinery. They didn't have machinery, but it would be something that would be a hindrance to doing the job. But the administrator role, the person who's the foreman or the overseer of what everybody else who's working is doing, would have the long sleeves so that they wouldn't get sunburned, and so that because they weren't having to deal with the precariousness of actually doing the work because they're the ones who are the supervisor, right?
Right.
And so that's really what the tunic is signifying, whether it had how many colors it had or not.
Right. It was probably colored, but the Hebrew word doesn't really say that. We get that from the Greek translation. Tells us, number one, that one of the words used is it was a multicolored robe or something like that. That's our tunic. That's the Greek translation. Now, there's a second story we have to look at very quickly. The word is only used twice, this expression. It's also used of Tamar, not the one in Genesis 38 that Judah had an affair with, but another daughter, the one that Amnon raped. It says when she was booted out of Amnon's house, she ripped her, and it's the same word. So apparently this always indicated some kind of royalty, some kind of leadership, some kind of overship, some kind of situation. Mm-hmm. So the two, and then the Greek translation comes along and says it was one for him. It says a multicolored. For her, it says it was especially embroidered. Mm-hmm. So out of that together, so all English translations went to many colored coat, even though the Hebrew doesn't say that.
And we see some of the challenge here in some of the translations. Here's the Aramaic Bible in plain English, and it says long sleeves. And then contemporary English version says fancy coat. And then the God's Word translation says special robe with long sleeves. So they try to get both things in there. It's got long sleeves, but it's also special somehow. International Standard Version says a richly embroidered tunic. And then the New American Standard Bible says, now Israel loved, oh, sorry, we went to the next, yeah. So that was that about the tunic, my mistake. We want to point out something else here on the next one. But you can see that it used long sleeve, richly embroidered, multicolored. They're not, it's not like we're up here telling you something that you can't go see in English translations. There is evidence where translators have really struggled with how to actually put this into English. And when you start seeing it, now you hopefully will know why those different terms are used. This one got your attention. The New American Standard Bible says in 37 verse 3, now Israel loved Joseph more than all his other sons because he was the son of his old age, and he made him a multicolored tunic. The first part there that's highlighted is actually, I think, fine. He loved him more than all of his other sons. That works because that's the others, not him plus the others, right? The multicolored tunic we just talked about. There's two things here. I should have highlighted the middle too. The son of his old age. We're going to talk about the top two of those. When he gives him the robe, when he gives him the tunic that has the long sleeves, and we're fine with it having multiple colors as well, you can see what's happening here depicted in this picture. They're in the background working, and he's becoming the supervisor. And it is a mathematical problem. Maybe I'm a little ahead of myself. Yeah, so still continuing on the robe, Dr. Cloud brought this up. He sent me this, and he said, this one's black and white. I said, well, it's probably a coloring book page for kids to actually color in the colors that go on the robe. But look at the bottom. That's why he really sent it. Now, Israel loved Joseph more than all his children because he is the son of his old age, and he made him a coat of many colors. And colors there is the European spelling with the U in it. Well, he can't love him more than all of his children because he's one of them, right?
And look at the top, it says coat of many colors, there's no color. I looked through 2,000 pictures, I think. Everyone was colored except a few. And this wasn't colored. Oh, there's one not colored. And then at the top it says, Joseph coat of many colors. Stan thinks this probably was one that if you had everything there, it was said, this is to be colored.
Yeah.
This is for a child. He's supposed to color these in. But if you look at the English translations, 9 out of 10 say a coat of many colors.
But the mathematician and Dr. Cloud picked up on the now Israel loved Joseph more than all of his children. And he said that's impossible. He said he can't love him more than all of his children because Joseph is one of his children. So that's loving Joseph more than 11 plus 1, which would be 12, which you can't do because he's one of them. So,
X can't be greater than X plus
right.
11 more children.
So that was maybe just funny for us. Apparently you don't think it's as funny. But it is important what translations say because what we're trying to point out is that they can mislead people into thinking things that can't be 100% correct.
I can only find one picture of Tamar's garment that got torn, and you can. It looks like probably a fancy, made of fancy material. You had that problem too. I mean.
Mm-hmm. And then you found this. If you think to yourselves, well, maybe this color thing was really unique. Maybe that's why they said color. But here's a 1900 BC painting in a tomb on the Nile where you can see that what's there in the hieroglyphs, there's multiple colors on all of their robes. So colors wouldn't have necessarily distinguished him if it had just been colors because these don't have any long sleeves. Right. It would have been the colors plus the long sleeves plus the length to the soles of the feet.
Yeah, when you look at this picture, this is from the Beni Hassan tomb on the Nile, as he said, on the Nile. And if you look in if it appears in many different handbooks of the Bible and all, and the animals are different colors and every one of them are different. And so I called up Bob Talbert, who was getting ready to go to Egypt, wanted me to go with him, and I said, I can't go. But when you guys are going to stop at the Beni Hassan tomb, I said, take a picture. I said, every time I look at a book, these coats are different color, the animals are different color. Take a picture and bring back and show me what the real picture is.
And he did, and they were colored.
That's right.
So what we're saying then is Joseph is the foreman. And when a loving Jacob gives Joseph a special tunic with long sleeves or a tunic reaching the extremities, the ordinary garment would have been sleeveless and would have only come to the knees. The gift of the tunic of Jacob grants his favorite son a sign of special privilege over his brothers. And when that happens, and then he wears it while he interprets his dreams, which I put up here, I don't know if you noticed that or not, Joseph the Magi? Yeah. I mean, this is John Micah said something about God not speaking the same way through the Joseph story as he did earlier, agreed. However, something is enabling Joseph to interpret dreams, his own, and then later in this story, others people's, and that's obviously God. And so that's what the Magi supposedly did as well. So that's interesting. But yet he's wearing this coat. He's then telling his brothers the interpretations of dreams, and so they call him, here comes the dreamer. Now he's not only their foreman, he's this guy who has risen above in knowledge as well. So what we're proposing is that Jacob probably didn't think it through really well. Could have had a discussion with the older boys when he decided to do this. But I'm going to go ahead and say that I think the son of his old age is that Joseph might, I'm not being dogmatic, he might have been more mature than some of his older brothers from the other wives.
Yeah, that was introduced to me by Dr. Yitzhak ben David Yerushalmi, one of my favorite Hebrew teachers at Hebrew Union. That was his interpretation. The very first thing we read in his class when I was first year there was the Joseph story. And he believed that this is what, because if he loved Joseph more because he was his child of his old age, then he had to love Benjamin even more because he's 6 or 7 or 8 years younger.
It would be of his older age.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So Dr. Yerushalmi said, I believe this means that he was an old age son. That is, he was a mature son. Mm-hmm. And that would make a lot of sense.
Yeah, and that explains, he has this dream. He's as you probably are aware if you've read it lately, the sheaves bow down, and he comes and tells his brothers about that. And then he has another dream, and he says, while he's telling about this dream, where the sun and the moon and the 11 stars bow down to him. And this is where Jacob says, oh, wait a second. Now you're telling me that your mother and I are going to bow down to you, and kind of tells him enough is enough. Like, let's cut this off. And then you pointed out something about that too, where his mother is actually not alive when
Yeah,
that statement
it's
is
talking
made.
about Leah,
Yeah.
who has taken the place of Rachel.
Right. And so the dream master, now Joseph's brothers saw him from a distance. This is how it all culminates. They see him from a distance. Here he comes in the tunic. He's interpreted the dreams. He's told them they're going to bow down to him. He's told the whole family that the whole family is going to bow down to him. And his dad has kind of said, enough is enough. So you can kind of understand how there would be a lot of animosity and a lot of disgruntledness going on. And here he comes because he's been sent out to go find out where they are and probably bring back a report if he had ever come back. And when they see him coming, they decide, this is it. We're just going to, well, they want to kill him. The plot is actually that they will kill him. But when Reuben heard the plot, he's attempting to set something up to keep this from happening. He's like, let's not actually take his life. Let's not shed blood. And so he's thinking, the writer tells us this, that he'll come back and get him later. But of course, they come up with another plan because they throw him in the cistern. There's no water in the cistern, and if you've paid really close attention to the reading, it's even very disheartening that they throw their brother in the cistern and then they sit down to have lunch. That's an insult on top of it. I mean, they probably didn't feed him, so they're trying to decide what they're going to do. They've put him down into this pit, basically in the ground. And this is where I think our presuppositions have to be checked, is that we can, of course, say that Joseph would not have been enjoying this. He would have probably been struggling, like shows here, to not be thrown in there. But, I don't know what I don't know about the story. Because we know later in the story he's going to say what you intended for evil, God intended for good, and he's a faithful follower of Yahweh. I think that goes back to supporting he is a more mature son than they are. Because, sure, he would have liked to have gotten out of the pit, don't mishear me. But I don't know that he would have gotten out of the pit and tried to kill them. His character seems to stay the same. He might be a little naive that he told the dreams in front of his brothers and made them more upset. But I don't ever see anger or vengeance or some sort of retribution actually happening from Joseph's side. So I don't think it's fair to force that into the story.
Right.
So Joseph is sold. They sit down to eat their food, and when they look up, they see a caravan of Ishmaelites coming from Gilead, and their camels were carrying spices and balm and myrrh down to Egypt. And so they decide, hey, let's not kill him. He is our own brother, so let's not actually take his life. Let's just sell him.
Yeah, Reuben, tried to step forward and help out. And remember who Reuben was? He's the first child born. Mm-hmm. However, since that time, he had an affair with one of the concubine's mothers and lost his position. And Joseph mentions that on his deathbed. He brings it when he's talked about the blessings in your futures. He brings up the fact. So Reuben has lost part of his status. And most of the time, it's going to be Judah doing the talking.
And I also found this interesting. I guess we can end here and just pick up next week because we've only got 1 minute left. 20 pieces of silver, not 30. Jesus is sold for 30. There's another 30 in the Old Testament. I'm trying to remember what it's for. That's the 30 pieces of silver is the value of like a lost servant or something like that that's returned. But 20, and I couldn't find anybody else in the entire Bible that was sold or transferred for 20 pieces of silver.
Yeah, and Jesus is betrayed. Of course, you had inflation take place.
Maybe so. Yeah,
several centuries later.
Could be.
But that's not a big amount of money, especially for rich people. These people are rich. Joseph has the fanciest coat, let's say, and everything. So Joseph maybe drove a Lamborghini, but the rest of them still drove Cadillacs and Buicks,
Yeah, well, I think they just had camels, but probably had the fastest camel. Maybe that's what it was.
That's right.
All right, well, we appreciate you suffering through this with us. We are excited to continue talking about Joseph, and there's a lot more coming, but instead of rushing through some of the more slides we had for this morning, we'll just start here next week and then add on some more to kind of part 2. So thank you for being with us, and I'll pray and we'll go about our day. Father, thank you so much for the story of Joseph. Thank you for slowing us down and as we study it, see the particularities of the text and your invitation for us to see the things that we would have emotionally in that text, the responses we would have if it was our brothers who had sold us. But help us actually fixate on Joseph and his response as we go through the rest of this story, and how he did what many of us would struggle to do, which is forgive and to look to you at all the times, even when he was in the pit or when he was on the way to Egypt, sold by his brothers as property to the Ishmaelites. It's hard for us to comprehend because we live in a place where those things don't usually happen to us. And yet there's something in our lives that we probably should be looking just to you on, and we should be letting you inform us of how we respond to it rather than our emotions or us. And so we just pray that you help us through that, and your Spirit guide us in all those situations as we go out and represent you this week in all that we say and we do. And we thank you for all the many blessings you've given us.